Welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Is Uzbekistan Running Out of Gas? Brought to you by Eriell Group, one of the largest independent oilfield services groups in the Eurasian region. Founded in 2004, Eriell Group provides well construction and workover services to major oil and gas companies in Central Asia, the Russian Federation, and the Middle East. Eriell operates with leading Russian and international companies such as Rosneft, Novatek, Gazprom, Lukoil, Uzbekneftegas, Petronas, CNPC, MOL Group, and many others. Uzbekistan has undergone radical reform in the years since President Shavkat Mirziyoyev assumed power in late 2016. In the natural gas industry, the government has eased conditions for foreign investors and worked to create a more market-driven sector. The Central Asian state is among the largest gas producers in the CIS space, although many of its largest fields were developed in the Soviet era. In this webinar, we discuss what the future has in store for Uzbekistan's gas sector. My name is Joseph Murphy, and I will be serving as moderator of this discussion. Joining us will be Uzbekistan's Deputy Energy Minister, Bekhzot Narmatov, Head of Eriell's Regional Business Unit for Central Asia, Bakhrambek Ismailov, and Louis Skyner, a partner at international law firm Dentons. I will start today's discussion by addressing questions to our three speakers, but before we begin, I'd like to briefly provide some information for viewers' benefit. Firstly, as some of our speakers today will be speaking in Russian, viewers are invited to use the interpretation function found at the bottom of the page to switch between the two languages. Viewers can also submit questions for the speakers at any point during this discussion, and I will address them at the end. May I just ask that viewers use the questions box rather than the chat box and write which speaker they would like to address the question to. So without further ado, let's begin. My first questions go to Deputy Energy Minister Bekhzot Narmatov. What is the current state of play for exploration and production in Uzbekistan? Could you maybe provide a summary of where the industry is now and what progress has been made in the past 5 years?
So we were even consumers of gas and liquid hydrocarbons, but lately became more natural gas consumers, and because of the lack of liquid hydrocarbon reserves. And I can say that Uzbekistan used to produce about 10 million tons of liquid hydrocarbons prior 2000, and thus was the consumption. Accordingly, was the consumption, and close to the first decade, end of the first decade of 21st century, we changed the direction to the natural gas, and we have one of the most extensive network of CNG stations in former Soviet Union. And in some regions, 99% of the cars are running on the natural gas. You can say NGVs, right? Mm-hmm. And thus the consumption is growing. And in order to support the consumption, the growth, economic growth within the country, which has boomed since the Shavkat Mirziyoyev have became president and liberalized the financial market, investment markets have been created, foreign investments are welcomed, and we have made a substantial changes to the legislation, created new ones in order to make it possible, right? So the main focus was not only the big projects, mega project, but also the small and medium business to improve the quality of the life and create additional jobs. That's why I can say that in the last 5 years, the consumption of natural gas have grown significantly. I can say that only the population's consumption for the last 40 years have changed from 9 billion to 13 billion in 2021. 9 billion was in 2016, I think. So we are making it's possible for the business to grow by supplying substantial amounts of natural gas. And that's why we are planning to go in the path of creating more jobs within the country and start a chain of added value chain, I would say, right? Mm-hmm. By processing the gas and producing, I would say, polymers and chemicals, which will be further used in other productions like detergents or the plastic products within the country, right? Mm-hmm. So, which is at least 3 or 4 times more profitable than just selling the gas. There are some directions in the where you can make 10 times more profit out of the gas than just exporting it. So we have processing plants, and we're planning the new ones. We have 2 big processing plants, Shultan Gas Chemical Complex and Uzbek Gas Chemical Complex. Both of them are producing the different type of polymers. We have 2 oil refineries, Bukhara and Fergana. Fergana is one of the first ones in Central Asia, which was built in early 20th century. And Bukhara refinery have been built at the end of 20th century, which is still fairly new, and we are working on improving its quality and increase the capacity in cooperation with Korean SK, engineering company called SK, and Fergana refinery is given to the company called Jazak Petroleum for management, and they are also optimizing the production and improving the quality of the produced products. For example, they're starting to produce more eco-friendly fuels of high octane and more, cleaner than the ones that were produced before. They're optimizing and they are doing the project for decarbonization of the production facilities. They're cooperating with Air Products to install the new hydrogen units and hydrogen production units to produce gray hydrogen, which will be further used for as a pilot for public transportation in Fergana. We're working on that as well, and we are increasing the capacity of Shultan Gas Chemical Complex to produce additional 300,000 tons of polymers annually. And we have 2 projects under consideration: methanol to olefin. There is MTO1, MTO2, and we have another approximately 50 projects aimed to deep processing of hydrocarbons, and process every drop of it. So there will be no byproducts, or everything will be processed and thrown into economy. So that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you for your very expansive answer. So a lot of applications for natural gas in Uzbekistan, and a lot of different plans, different avenues for adding value to the resource. So you mentioned the remaining gas reserves in Uzbekistan. Where are they located in the country? And even though Uzbekistan's basins were first developed in the Soviet era, what are the prospects for new gas discoveries?
I should say the gas reserves are split into evenly to Bukhara-Khiva region, Amudarya Basin, and Ustyurt Plateau. And we are making more discoveries in Ustyurt Plateau, which was not as extensively studied as Bukhara-Khiva region. I would say Amudarya Basin, where we have the main production facilities now, the field facilities. But we are going deeper in Ustyurt. Latest discoveries of the fields are more than 4 kilometers. And I think that we will have a lot of discoveries specifically in Ustyurt regions. it doesn't mean that we're going to focus only on Usur region. I think that we are rerunning seismic and exploration works in Amu Darya Basin as well, and other parts of the country. Recently, we have reached an agreement with Russian Geological in cooperation with Jizah Petroleum. They're going to conduct also an extensive exploration program, only exploration program in Usturt and other unprospected areas of the country. So we are, how to say properly in English, we are investing more in exploration, which was not done in early 21st century. So the main focus was on creating an infrastructure and improving the production. So the latest projects were also aimed to that, but not much was done when it comes to the exploration. Only a few small projects in RLC Basin were done. That was limited to only one project, right? And some work was done with Gazprom, but we are now doing an extensive study to understand the petroleum system of the country. So I think that in the near future we will have new discoveries in Lower Jurassic, Permian, and so on.
Okay, and we touched on this, but what is the outlook for Uzbek gas production? So the government has said before it plans to cease gas exports by 2025. You mentioned that the situation reversed with Russia already. That now you're taking gas from Russia rather than sending it there. What about the outlook for exports to China?
Well, Ministry of Energy's main task is to create a system of sufficient supplies for the economy of energy resources. Not only natural gas, but also electric energy, the power. Mm-hmm. We are moving from the economy which was based on only its internal capacity for energy resources. Thus, its growth was heavily dependent on it, right? We're now saying that letting the economy run freely, but our main purpose is to supply sufficient amount of energy resources, which means that we are open to the imports as long as it brings benefit to economy and improves its GDP growth, right? Usually, in order to ensure the GDP growth, you always have to have a reserve. We do realize that it's going to cost more and more expensive if you go deeper, right? Drilling is expensive, treatment maybe will be expensive. The new areas will require more capex in order to create the infrastructure in the place, especially in the Usut region, which is mostly uninhabited and desert areas, right? So, but we don't want economy to be tied to what we are doing in oil and gas sector. We are now improving the infrastructure, gas transportation infrastructure, in order to, if necessary, import the amount of gas we need to have economy growing in aimed pace, like at least 5-6%. But we want to have reserves in the system, contracted amount of gas, which would be necessary for the economy if there will be certain facilities, let's say, start earlier than it's planned. We need to have an extra amount of gas in the system, right? This is our aim to ensure. So yes, we want to decrease, as I said when I was answering your first question, that we want more added value products produced here. And if it requires decreasing the amount of export, why not? So okay. Those 50 projects are all aimed to deep processing of gas. We will use the latest licenses. We are creating I want to go back to that MTO project that I mentioned, methanol to olefin. This is an idea of creating a sort of a cluster where each stage of the gas processing might be owned by one or two companies, or it can be a joint venture, or it can be a private owned by in a offtake basis. So utilities can be one company, technical gas can be one company, and end product can be bought off by by the company. So it would be pre-contracted in every stage. So it's a new approach to attract investments and ensure the target IRR, internal rate of revenues, for each stage.
Mhm. Thank you very much. And yeah, I already see that some of the topics you've mentioned have generated a few questions, which we'll address at the end. If I can move on now to Mr. Bakhrambek Ismailov from Eriell, the head of Eriell's business unit for Central Asia. What is Eriell's take as a leading oilfield services player in Uzbekistan? What is Eriell's take on the prospects for the country's oil and gas sector?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Yes, I apologize for connecting slightly later because of technical issues. Can you hear us? Can you see us? Yes, we can. Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Narmatov. Well, before I proceed with the response, I would like to give you an overview, dear participants, about the Eriell's operations in Uzbekistan. Recently, on the 14th June, Eriell has celebrated its 17th anniversary. On 14th June 2004, our company has signed its first contract for construction of 28 operating wells in Buzafur field owned by Uzbek Neftegas, and we have commissioned the first drilling rig, and this contract was implemented successfully on time. And over these 17 years, the number of our staff has reached 11,000 people, and the company today has 75 owned rigs, and we have drilled over 3,000 oil and gas wells, and a total of 10 million to 400,000 of rock was drilled through. And over the last years, in all subsectors of oil and gas sector in Uzbekistan, we see a lot of positive changes. Demand requirements to the subsoil users are changing, and the customers are upgrading the technical requirements, and the requirements are changing in the selection of drilling contractors. I can give you an example. In 2016, our company attended in a bidding for selection of a drilling contractor by Uzgorgas Chemical, so for construction of 550 operating wells in the Surgil field. And one of the requirements of the client was that drilling contractor should assume responsibility for certain product yield of the well after it is drilled. And this is the first time when the contractors were held responsible for the performance, where the drilling company is responsible for the outcome. On the one hand, identification of the drilling point and depth is done by the customer, but we are responsible for the end result. But I would like to know that this contract was delivered by our company in full, with 1.5 years earlier than scheduled, with 100% outcome. So all 50 wells we drilled have resulted in the required flow of natural gas. Today, almost all customers require drilling contractors more than they did 10, 20 years ago. And we are giving up the classical drilling contractor approaches. We are now studying geology more. We do our own geophysical research. We use into the best technologies and engineering solutions, and all these activities are aimed at reaching a final result. In Uzbekistan, majority of fields are developed and operated uh, for quite a long time, and to increase production of hydrocarbons, we today need additional efforts. And in the oil and gas sector of Uzbekistan today, we are developing on the path of increased geological series, research, as Deputy Minister said. And based on these requirements of the oil and gas sector, Eriell tries to use to use advanced action. And I would like, analyzing our operations in oil and gas sector, we would like to share the our outlook of the development of fuel and energy sector. When back in 2014 we started our own operations at Guzakor field and Eastern Guzakor field, despite these fields being discovered in 1970s, their development never started because of the perceived lack of profitability and high level of costs of the small fields with hard to explore reserves. But Eriell's first experience of drilling in these fields, Muzaffar, has shown that profitable operation of smaller reserves fields is possible. And since Eriell started operated in Uzbekistan, we analyzed the drilling related data, and we have identified the bottlenecks that were preventing construction of the well systems in the field. And as a result of our analysis, we started developing new technologies allowing to drill in very complex geological conditions to the depth of over 4,000 meters against the backdrop of high impact of geological and technological factors. Also, increased production of gas in Uzbekistan facilitated the use of compression gas compression technologies in large gas condensate fields. And today the government of Uzbekistan pays a lot of attention to the further development of oil and gas operations, and understanding the need for further development of oil and gas sector. And this is where our company is an active player and provides all the support in attracting and using new technologies, exploring new technological options for production of hard to explore, hard to extract hydrocarbons. And as my colleague Mr. Narmatov said before, over this period, we have commissioned, Uzbekistan has commissioned two gas chemical factories, plants, and our company too was involved in construction of these gas chemical refineries, in construction of engineering infrastructure, and creation of technological facilities, assets. So the these are all this is my take on the priorities of the development of oil and gas sector in Uzbekistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So very interesting to hear about the work Eriell was doing in applying new technologies, new techniques to old fields, or fields that were discovered some time ago. You mentioned a lot geological complexities. You spoke about hard to recover or resources. Could you tell me a bit more about what that means? What are the geological characteristics of Uzbekistan?
Yeah, I would like to go back to the history, and in the period from 2004 till 2010, Eriell was doing works under one of contracts for drilling. But starting 2010, the company has revisited its technologies for exploration in the mountainous in the fields located in mountainous areas. And Eriell for 70 years had been working both in Uzbekistan and in Russia, and in Gulf countries and the Southeast Asian countries, and studying we see that geology of drilling and exploration in different countries is different. And from our experience in Uzbekistan, we see that we need to use more advanced technologies. And today, Eriell Group is not only a drilling contractor, but is a leading partner for our customers in decision making, for making decisions for exploration and intensifying the yield of the fields. And our analysis of geological characteristics of the fields has shown that we have an urgent need for systemic organizational structure to analyze geological data that available on our fields to support the selection of the most appropriate approaches and methods, technologies. And in 2020, we have created, as part of our group, a new system of geological and hydrodynamical study surveys of reservoirs, and we are creating a geological database on the oil and gas fields in Uzbekistan. As I have already mentioned, in Uzbekistan, geological characteristics of oil and gas fields varies in different regions. In Uzturk, for example, productive horizons are multi-layer and lens-like, and while in Bukhara, where there are different carbon-bearing and aggressive acidic environments with high content of sulfur dioxide and other byproducts. In Surkhan region, for example, productive horizons are located in great depth from 3,000 to 5,000 meters. Also, we see water-bearing aggressive sour environments with high sulfur dioxide and CO2 content in the gas. And during when we drill in these geologically complex situations, we observe we observe caving formation and many other challenges, making drillers job difficult. But I can confirm that our company today, to address these problems, is implementing a new system of geological exploration in the fields based on maximum extraction of geological information as part of the drilling operation, and we are working in Usturt region in the project called 25th anniversary of Uzbekistan's independence. And this is where we have collected all this data. Thank you.
Thank you. Just then you mentioned the 25 years of independence gas field. Briefly, could you just, for our viewers' benefit, tell us what other key upstream projects are underway in Uzbekistan?
Today in Uzbekistan, we have several ongoing key and important projects in both upstream and exploration subsectors. And I would like to note that in 2017, the government of Uzbekistan has approved a program aimed at increasing production of hydrocarbons for the period from 2017 to 2021. And according to this 5-year roadmap, plans were to explore, to construct oil and gas wells in different regions, and improve and construct gas pipelines, collectors. And another important project is a project for implementation of pre-exploration. 25 years of independence is one of the important key projects. And we are working to fully to develop this field, and we have already completed 40% of project activities, and we are now currently constructing a surface infrastructure, and by 2023 this field will be commissioned to full-scale operation. And despite the quite complex geological conditions for well drilling and exploration of the productive horizons in this field, our company has completely implemented the intended technology despite the difficult conditions.
Thank you very much. And if we could now move on to you, Louis Skyner. So how favorable are the conditions for exploration and production companies participating in upstream projects in Uzbekistan compared with other countries in the CIS region?
Thank you for the question. Thank you to both speakers for very informative presentations. I'm not a geologist, so I'm not going to talk with such insight as to the geology. My work has been as a lawyer. I spent a number of years as the leading legal counsel at Statoil, working in Moscow for the region, and have been working recently in Uzbekistan. So I don't have any of the insights the previous speakers have. I guess they both pointed to the fact that the reserves of Uzbekistan are much smaller than the reserves of both Russia and Kazakhstan. There's also issues in terms of how companies would monetize production. Clearly, it costs more to get it to market. There's also, as been mentioned, a plan now that the government will prohibit export from 2025. So I guess if you're looking at Uzbekistan as an international oil and gas company, you won't get anywhere near as excited as you would looking at both Russia and Kazakhstan, because the reserves are bigger and there's more opportunity to export. I think the other thing is that, and I would say this because I'm a lawyer, that no matter how they've been covered in the press, I think both Russia and Kazakhstan have done a reasonably good job establishing petroleum regimes where you have a balance of investor and government interests. Clearly, this has been an evolution. When oil and gas companies first started working in Russia in the 90s, the Russian government awarded PSAs, famous ones being at Sakhalin. 10 years later, Putin was calling them colonial regimes, and quite rightly to some extent, because the international oil companies, I think, did take liberties, they did inflate costs, and because of the ways the PSAs were drafted, they were able to increase their share of the oil as cost oil. So the Russian system evolved. I mean, they introduced risk service arrangements. You see the same in Kazakhstan. I mean, obviously, you had the two flagship projects, Tengiz, Kashagan. I mean, Chevron, Exxon, Agip, Shell at Karachaganak, they've all been there and they're all still there, even if Kazmunai Gas has increased their share. So I think that the challenge for Uzbekistan is both defining and implementing a framework that succeeds in achieving that balance of interests. I know the ministry is currently very busy in terms of drafting a new law on subsoil, a new law on gas. So this is a work in process, but it's also important that the law is implemented consistently. I think, from a lawyer's perspective, the risk service arrangements, the law was adopted in September last year. It hasn't been used yet, but I mean, I think that will be a very useful tool. We saw it first in Iraq in 2009. I remember when I worked for Statoil on West Kurna 2 with Lukoil, their auctions were based on risk service arrangements. It then spread to other countries because countries realized that E&P companies are prepared to do work on a different model. And given the size of the reserves in Uzbekistan, given the need, as the last speaker has emphasized, for new technology to be deployed, new techniques, I think it would be good if Uzbekistan were to run now auctions, competitive tenders for such arrangements and bring in, experienced, well-respected international contractors who could then create confidence and help other local contractors improve production. I think it's hard to compare Uzbekistan with its neighbors. But at the same time, I think Uzbekistan has a lot to learn from its neighbors in that no matter how they're slated in the Western press, Exxon are still in Sakhalin-1. BP are still a large shareholder of Rosneft. As I said, Shell, Chevron, and the others still have large shares in Kazakhstan. So you need to create that sort of, I think, image of stability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you mentioned risk service agreements. What other options are available for an upstream company wanting to participate in a particular project?
I mean, to date, you have seen product sharing agreements used. I mean, Lukoil has one. Product sharing agreements, I think, aren't really applicable any longer because of the size of the reserves that are going to be produced. I think also as countries de-risk, they move away from such models. Clearly a product sharing agreement is an agreement that gives the investor comfort they're going to recover their costs up front. And that's why, I guess Russia used them in the 1990s, or Uzbekistan used them. But the more international investors are confident in the system, I think the more you can transit towards arrangements like risk service agreements. You can also award exploration licenses. One of my clients, Epsilon Development Company, has, I think, 5 or 6 licenses. They are, like Eriell, they are bringing in, experienced, seasoned drilling contractors. They are increasing production on the fields they have. So I think for smaller fields, it would actually be good to increase competition by, giving licenses, exploration licenses out to different types of companies. I mean, clearly, from the ministry's perspective, and Mr. Narmatov's emphasized this, maintaining the level of gas production is critical, given now the need to import gas and the increased reliance on gas. But I think the experience in, Western Europe and elsewhere shows that competition downstream, which I know is a big aim now in Uzbekistan with the liberalization of the gas sector. We're working on a World Bank project that's looking at unbundling third-party access, all the usual stuff you've seen happen over the last 20 years in the UK, US, Europe. That needs to be complemented by competition upstream. It doesn't make sense to liberalize downstream and have monopolies upstream, because you want to obviously create competitive tension. So I think it would be probably to Uzbekistan's advantage if smaller Western oil and gas companies were given plays and helped improve the technology know-how and helped improve the competition.
Okay, and what would you say have been the most effective reforms undertaken by the government in terms of encouraging this international upstream investment? These reforms, both specific to the sector, but taking a step back, reforms that have also benefited the general economy.
Well, I mean, I think, as everyone probably knows, that the key reforms were ones enacted nearly 4 years ago, in 2017, when currency controls were ended. I think that was critical when the central bank took the decision to unpeg the sum from the dollar and permitted companies to buy and sell hard currency for different operations. Then in March 2019, you had the end on capital controls, which means that companies can fully repatriate their capital gains from investments without any conversion needs. They are clearly significant reforms. I think that the challenge now for the Uzbek government is that they created so much interest internationally and quite a lot of expectation. It is to maintain the pace of reform. The president in April 2019 announced that 28 or 29 companies would be partially privatized. That didn't happen. It is now in the process of happening. I mean, there are a couple of privatizations that are underway, but I think it's important this year that Uzbekistan is able to complete a couple of privatizations, that it's able to get good value, that it's able to show the investor community that these privatizations are done at arm's length, and that you create confidence. And I think the way to do that is to clearly set out the policy, and obviously, as the Uzbek government has been very open about, improve efficiency and performance. I mean, that they're working actively with the development banks on that. They also need, I think, to bring in the typical players in a reform process. The investment banks, the underwriters, the lawyers. There's a whole army of people that obviously make money in the West, but they're there for a reason, because they create value in the value chain, and they create confidence that when a process has begun, it's going to end more or less where they hoped it would end. So yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of progress, but there's been a slowing down. Obviously, COVID is part of the explanation, but I think, yeah, now it's critical that Uzbekistan starts to deliver on some of the privatizations. In the oil and gas sector, as I mentioned, there are a whole series of laws now being drafted that will include provisions on unbundling, third-party access, tariff deregulation. There's the law on subsoil. All those measures need to be adopted, implemented. But if markets are to work, you need independent regulators. That's the lesson from the rest of the world. You need to create a regulator who isn't, under pressure for policy reasons to make decisions in one direction or another. I think that's going to be a critical element. I know in the project we're doing with the World Bank, that's certainly an issue we're flagging in reports, because that's how you create transparency. That's how you create confidence. It's by having independent regulators who can look at how the system functions and make sure that it functions in the most effective way.
Thank you very much. If we could, so we're a little behind schedule, but not too much. If we could move on now to the viewer Q&A section. So we've had a lot of questions come in. Quite a few are addressed to Mr. Narmatov, who I see is now present again. So if we could start with a question about imports to Mr. Narmatov. Uzbekistan bought 1.5 BCM of gas from Turkmenistan via Gazprom. Can you explain the rationale of working with Gazprom, and will Uzbekistan continue purchases of gas from Turkmenistan later this year?
As I said, our main purpose is to supply sufficient amounts of gas to support economic growth. And it doesn't matter, we can buy, if there is a gas in Afghanistan, we'll buy it in Afghanistan. Even the Cold War period, West bought gas from Russia, and believe it or not, there is the sanctions against Russia from the United States, it's heavy, but the last year was a peak. They beat the record of purchase of oil from Russia. Mm-hmm. So buying Gazprom or Turkmenistan, we will be importing necessary amounts of gas if it requires if economic growth requires importing, why not? It can be 1.5, it can be 10. It doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, economic impact will be much better.
Thank you.
With regards to the gas buying from Turkmenistan and a Gazprom, since Gazprom has a firm contracts and we need an insured supplier, if the Gazprom is offering us a good price, we're buying from Gazprom.
Mm-hmm. So just business. Thank you. So I'd like to remind our viewers, you can still submit your questions, but I still have quite a few here already. So again, to you, Mr. Narmatov, 2 questions. What is the likelihood of a natural gas export ban occurring? And do you have any forecasts, targets for production and exports in 2021 and 2022?
It is 21. It is there are numbers that still to be clarified, because we are now negotiating with China on the flexibility of the export amounts depending on the time of the year. So I cannot clearly say if the number I can give you might be different at the end of the year. So for production, I've said that it is almost 56 billion cubic meters production forecast for this year for all the companies operating in Uzbekistan, not only Uzbekneftegas. And then usually what we are doing now, we are changing the approach on how we forecast. That's why ability to import and immunity of the economy on or decreasing the dependency on internal production gives a breathing space for Uzbekneftegas to reevaluate its resources, to find an optimal ways to produce in the most effective and in the most cost-effective way. So we are getting away from volume-based forecast to profit-based forecast. Since Uzbekneftegas is going for an IPO, in near future, and they will bear the responsibility for every dollar they spend, because they will have shareholders and so on, and that's why this year's forecast being analyzed, all the geological and technical activities of UNG have been audited by Schlumberger. They're about to complete the whole 2021 by the end of August, and at the same time we're planning to start production forecast for next year with Schlumberger. So we have the Uzbek Neftegaz have created static and dynamic models of the majority of the fields, which gives an opportunity to optimize the geological, the technical activities planned for the next year. And based on that, we try to more accurately forecast of the production that will not harm the fields itself, and it will be the most cost effective. And based on the forecast for the next year, we will, if there are gaps between consumption and production within the country, and taking into consideration our export obligations, PSA obligations, where we have certain amount of gas to be exported, which of course will bring a benefit in form of a tax and revenue or other type of collections going to the budget, and we'll see how much import we can do. So we need to get away from the volume-based forecast to profit-based forecast. We move to profit-based, and it doesn't mean it might not mean that the maximum production will have a maximum profit. So we want a minimum expenditures per cubic meter produced.
So value over volume then? Yes. Okay, thank you. And I thought this was a particularly interesting question addressed to you, Mr. Skyner. So you had BP and several other international majors sign preliminary deals to do some investigating for oil and gas in Uzbekistan. But I think it's fair to say the priorities of these companies have changed significantly with the energy transition now feeling in full swing. So their appetite for new acreage and new countries is not as it used to be. You mentioned various old contractual models for Uzbekistan to attract E&P companies. They didn't work so well before. Why do you think they will work in the new geopolitical energy atmosphere? Maybe we can approach this firstly. You know, do the majors still have appetite for moving into Uzbekistan?
I think the other two speakers probably are in a best position to answer that. We as a law firm are not working with any of the majors, and I mean, I think the person who's asked the question is correct that there was an interest, but you know, as everyone said, the reserves really don't justify a big international E&P company coming in. I think there's also issues with value chain. I mean, you know, some of the majors have particular expertise and experience more in the refining downstream, but they want to make sure that they can make the whole value chain work. So they would need, you know, positions upstream, midstream, downstream, and maybe that hasn't been necessarily on the table. Yes, of course they are refocusing. I think a lot of it is still noise, but it's becoming more and more reality. I know from my former employers at Statoil, which is now called Equinor, because they've got rid of the word oil from their name, that yeah, more and more time and money is being spent on wind and other forms of green energy. They still obviously produce oil and gas, and to that extent, I think all the majors are still looking for good oil and gas plays locally, globally. I think there's probably a little bit too much hype as to how quickly oil and gas will die. It's not going to die a rapid death. with regards to the contract models, I mean, I was suggesting more that you have smaller E&P companies, stroke contractors who would be happy to do work on a risk service basis. I mean, you know, you get guaranteed a fee for reaching the base production, and you get a premium if you increase the production above that. You know, we have clients who've looked at Uzbekistan, Expert Petroleum, one of them, who've done work in Ukraine, in Romania, elsewhere. As I said, Epsilon Development Company, they actually own licenses in Uzbekistan, but they've brought in oilfield tools from the US to increase production in Fergana. I think they're bringing across in July next month the Jaffa Exploration Group, you know, a Texan potential investor who sees real potential in some of those fields. So I think Uzbekistan is interesting, not necessarily for the big boys like Shell, Exxon, Equinor, but it's much more interesting for companies who are focusing on the increase in production and focusing on the improvements, the efficiencies, the companies that are looking at margins much more carefully and getting better value. And, you know, my own experience from working in Statoil for a number of years is that the bigger the organization, the less attention you pay to margins, because you're in a luxurious position. You know, your budgets are large. As long as the price of oil and gas is okay, then, you know, you're making money. The advantage of bringing in these smaller, sort of lighter, leaner operators is that they're used to working with smaller margins, and they only make their margins if they deliver. And I think that is of mutual interest. So yeah, maybe I misphrased myself. I didn't mean, you know, the big E&P companies. I'm thinking more of smaller outfits, but, you know, people who are prepared to invest money.
Thank you. And Mr. Narmatov, maybe you would like to add to this.
I can add to what Luis said. He's rightly saying that it is more of a service and small E&P companies focus for Uzbekistan, because big companies have a minimum benchmark where they will invest in terms of reserves, benchmark in terms of reserves and production capabilities. That's why it's, by the way, Uzbekneftegas have identified more than 20 fields for risk service contract basis. They are working on the documentation. And Expert Petroleum is participating in ongoing bid for 5 fields in Gazli region of Uzbekistan, and it's in the final phase, and we're expecting to receive results next week, and we'll see how it goes. It's the first of a kind bid that we have conducted, and it was difficult for us because it was an unusual practice, and usually it was a direct negotiation between two sides, and they have done some with Schlumberger about 5 years ago, and it stopped because the either Schlumberger have changed priorities or Uzbekneftegas have changed priorities. I was going to go working for government at that time, so I don't know the exact details of what happened. Anyways, let's see what happens, and I agree with Luis once again that we need to focus on more technology-based service companies and small E&P companies who are focusing on small margins, small fields, where they can use their capabilities, knowledge, and maybe the experience, and the resources that they have. It may not be big, so they focus on smaller fields and utilize the existing resources they have. So they don't want to be overstretched with like big companies can allow themselves the luxury of spending a lot of money creating an infrastructure, investing more and more on other things associated.
Mm-hmm. And one final question also to you. Do you see gas prices increasing, becoming market prices? So this is a question about liberalization of the Uzbek gas market.
Yes, it will eventually bring, if you liberalize the market and get away from subsidies, general subsidy that we have in Uzbekistan, and make the companies who are working in the gas distribution, gas transportation profitable as a government companies, as entities. As I said, we're making we are focused on making these companies profitable and creating a new corporate, new corporate behavior or responsibilities for each company, because we want their financial system change to switch from old Soviet-based style to the new financial reporting, to using new financial reporting tools, the international standard ones. And it will also bring the responsibility between the stakeholders. So we cannot put the subsidies on the activity of the companies. We would rather subsidize the vulnerable part of the population or the startup companies who rely on, until they, until they improve their activities, maybe they rely on subsidies, but it will be case by case. But in general, we want the market prices, flexible market prices, or fluctuating, right? It would be fluctuating market prices, but we want to keep the subsidies for vulnerable part of the population, which would be better, because we are now subsidizing for everyone, rich and poor, right? Is it fair? Of course not. So we want to decrease the burden on the budget by moving away from the subsidies and creating more money turnover in the market and generating more taxes that goes to the budget, and part of that will go to the vulnerable part of the population. I think that would be more fair. And of course, the gas prices will be going up, but not it will not be the shock therapy. We're taking measures to take it step by step, and we are focusing on how we can decrease the impact of changing the system to that population, because our main focus is population.
Thank you.
Then based on that, we will create regulatory rules. We will have a separate regulating body that would, regulate the market prices and cut off the syndicates playing with the tariffs and so on and so on. So it will be partially regulated in terms of the rules, so that they will not have a conflict of interest in the chain.
Thank you. So we're running a little bit over the time. So before I wrap things up, do any of our speakers have any brief closing remarks to make on what we've discussed today?
If you allow me, and we are, our audience have to understand where we are having the reforms. We are in the midst of the reforms that are taking us from the old system to the new system, and enabling creating a whole new market, which is not known for Uzbekistan. We're creating a utility market, enabling all the players in the market from downstream to upstream and distribute from upstream to downstream and to the end users. That would be fair to everyone. And the main focus would be, again, I repeated several times, that we have to ensure the economic growth. And it's proven that if you let the market regulate itself, let it flow, it will be able to stabilize itself, as long as you have a critical supplies coming in to the market, which is the energy resources. If you don't have energy resources, you can forget about the economic growth. That's why for example, we had plans to have 3.5 gigawatts of renewables generated using the wind. We already have the firm contracts and agreements that will take us in 2 or 3 years to 3 gigawatts of wind. We have conducted several bids for scaling solar, and we have the record prices now in Uzbekistan, record low prices for solar power. And we are in the way that we becoming energy dependent and independent in the same way. We are decreasing the use of natural resources. We're decreasing its effect on ecosystem and going to the renewable more. And you can see that in Uzbekistan, we are now giving subsidies for electric car production. And several regions have already developed projects to produce electric cars. We have created a research institute that will be working on, it's under Ministry of Energy, that will be working on renewables, including hydrogen. We don't want to be anymore we want sooner become a technology creating country, not technology importing country. That's why we started to invest in hydrogen and renewables. And we have already partners with Air Products and Aqua Power on that project. And it's an open project. We had business forum with Germans, and Siemens have increased interest. United Emirates, Mazda have increased interest, and everybody is now working on the green business. I mean, rightly said that Equinor have changed its name from Statoil to Equinor, and we also know the new regulations in Europe for decarbonization and companies being sued for producing the oil and gas. And recently, I guess it was the latest was Shell. Am I right, Luis?
Yes, yeah, very interesting court
So
case.
we are on that path as well. And it works two ways. We are economy decreasing its dependency on natural resources, but we have increasing dependency on electric power, but it's being compensated by renewables. So we are also working at the same time for effective use of natural resources when it comes to the, for example, heating or using, we are encouraging energy efficiency, not only in the households, but also in businesses, giving the sort of discounts for the companies who are using energy efficient technologies. Well, it is sad, but we are using 4 times more energy, study shows, than developed countries for heating a 1 cubic meter of space. We introduce new standards for construction where we have more strict rules for thermal insulations. We are working on the legislation that will enable us to provide subsidies for energy efficient solutions in the companies and the household. So for example, we already have 30% compensation if the household uses off-grid solution for heating and for solar. So we will compensate 30% of whatever money they spend. So that's, if we believe that if we, at least for the population, force them to use energy efficient technologies for heating, we will free about 2 billion cubic meters of gas annually, which is equivalent to discovering a new field. And if we go further and use energy efficient technologies in industries, for example, now we're introducing new H+ or J+ type turbines and replacing old Soviet-made low efficiency turbines, which means that we will be using same amount of gas, but producing 2 times more energy. This is also what we're doing. So whoever wants to join us in these endeavors, I mean, they're welcome. We are open to the offers, and we're doing our best to catch up with the rest of the world when it comes to the renewable, because it's a one-way. It has a double effect on us. It decreases the human activities effect on the environment, and also creating a sort of an immunity and decreasing the dependency on natural resources and using more renewables.
Thank you.
Если разрешите, я тоже несколько слов.
If I may, I would like to say a couple of words.
Please do.
I would like to thank the organizers and participants of this webinar. A lot of useful information was shared in the process, and this kind of exchanges are always useful. Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you to you too. Any other closing remarks?
I would simply echo what Mr. Narmatov has said. I mean, increasingly, you need to look at the energy system of a country in an integrated way, different sources of energy, different uses of energy, different participants in the energy system. And I think Uzbekistan has a lot of potential. I mean, we've been working with Mr. Narmatov and his colleagues on an EBRD project. We've also been working on the other renewable projects he's mentioned. Clearly, Uzbekistan has an abundance of sun. It has good wind conditions in certain parts of the country. Yes, those projects are at the moment supported by the development banks. They're attracting sort of sovereign-backed investors, but as I think confidence increases in the country, as deals reach financial close, as the risks are more effectively allocated between government, lender, and sponsor, then I think you'll see more and more non-recourse project financing. I think hopefully you'll see more and more players. As Mr. Narmatov mentioned, hydrogen now is the buzzword. Still expensive, still needs to be improved. You need to modularize it, you need to scale it up. In 5-6 years' time, when that's happening in Europe, then you can deploy it in Uzbekistan with great success. I mean, one of the challenges in Europe actually with hydrogen is the fact that it requires so much energy. I mean, to run ammonia production or green hydrogen production, you need to increase your renewable power production sixfold. So, Uzbekistan can actually benefit from the timing and sequencing of the changes. If in the next 2 or 3 years, as Mr. Narmatov says, if these projects do reach close and are constructed, then they can move to the next stage. So I think the future is very, very bright in that sense, because the resources are obviously there in abundance.
Thank you. This has been our webinar brought to you by Eriell Group on Is Uzbekistan Running Out of Gas? I'd like to give my special thanks to our speakers today for taking the time to take part in this discussion, and also to our viewers for attending. Thank you very much, everyone.